Rich man saves a pregnant woman from the rain. The baby's father shocks him. Emma Carter's life had always been marked by a quiet rhythm of stability and predictability. At 28, she had achieved what many considered the hallmarks of success: a promising career in marketing, a supportive family, loyal friends, and now, a wedding on the horizon with the love of her life, Mark Bennett. Her days were filled with the comforting hum of routine: morning coffee brewed just the way she liked it, evenings spent planning her wedding or catching up on her favorite shows, and weekends with Mark, exploring new restaurants or simply strolling through the city park. It wasn't the kind of life that invited drama or surprises, and for Emma, that was a blessing. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. Mark had entered her life 3 years earlier, during a networking event for young professionals. Emma had almost skipped the gathering, but her best friend, Claire, had convinced her otherwise. "You never know who you might meet," Claire had teased, and as it turned out, she was right. Mark had been charming, with a warm smile and an easy confidence that drew people in. They had spent the evening talking about everything and nothing, finding common ground in their love for travel, books, and a shared dream of building a family one day. By the end of the night, Emma felt as though she had known him for years. Their relationship progressed naturally. Mark was everything Emma had hoped for in a partner: kind, attentive, and ambitious. He worked in finance, a field Emma knew little about but respected for its complexity. Mark's stories about his day-to-day challenges fascinated her, and she admired his dedication to his career. He was the kind of man who held doors open, remembered her favorite desserts, and sent her thoughtful texts in the middle of busy workdays. He seemed too good to be true, but over the years, he consistently proved that his goodness was genuine, or so Emma believed. The wedding planning had been a whirlwind, but Emma thrived in the chaos. From picking out the perfect floral arrangements to choosing the menu for their reception, every detail filled her with excitement. Mark, though less enthusiastic about the minutiae, supported her decisions wholeheartedly. "Whatever makes you happy, Em," he would say, his voice full of affection. It was a phrase he used often, and it only reinforced Emma's belief that she had found the perfect partner. But beneath the surface of this idyllic life, there was an undercurrent of unease that Emma rarely acknowledged. Mark's past was a shadowy, undefined part of him, something he rarely spoke about. Early in their relationship, Emma had asked about his childhood, curious about the experiences that shaped him. Mark had brushed off her questions with vague answers, saying his upbringing had been complicated and that he preferred to focus on the present. At the time, Emma had respected his boundaries, but as their relationship deepened, the lack of details about his past began to gnaw at her. Emma's friends occasionally voiced their concerns, though they did so delicately. Claire, in particular, had once remarked, "Don't you think it's odd that Mark never talks about his family? I mean, he doesn't even have photos of them." Emma had laughed off the comment, chalking it up to Claire's naturally inquisitive nature. "Not everyone has a picture-perfect childhood," Emma had replied. "Mark's just private about his past, and that's okay. He's here now, and that's what matters." But even as she said the words, a part of her wondered if she was being too dismissive. As the wedding day approached, the cracks in her carefully constructed sense of security began to widen. Mark's behavior, once so predictable, started to shift in subtle ways. He became more guarded, often stepping out of the room to take phone calls or turning his phone face down when they were together. He seemed distracted during conversations, his mind elsewhere even as he nodded along. When Emma asked if everything was okay, he assured her that it was just work stress. "Big projects, tight deadlines," he'd say with a tired smile. Emma wanted to believe him, but the changes were hard to ignore. One evening, as Emma sorted through wedding invitations at the kitchen table, Mark received a call that seemed to unsettle him. He excused himself and stepped outside, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. When he returned, his usual warmth had been replaced by a quiet unease. "Everything all right?" Emma asked, trying to keep her tone light. Mark hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Just a work thing," he said, brushing it off. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than he was letting on. Emma's doubts grew in the days that followed, though she tried her best to push them aside. She told herself that every couple faced challenges, that Mark's occasional secrecy was no different from the small quirks and habits everyone brought into a relationship. She reminded herself of all the good times they had shared, their weekend getaways, the long nights talking about their dreams, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. Those memories were enough to keep her grounded, at least for a while. But the nagging questions about Mark's past refused to fade entirely. Emma found herself replaying old conversations in her mind, searching for clues she might have missed. She thought about the time Mark had abruptly ended a dinner date to take an urgent phone call, the time he had mentioned an old friend but quickly changed the subject when Emma asked for details. She thought about the way he sometimes seemed to avoid certain parts of town, as if there were places he didn't want to revisit. Despite these lingering doubts, Emma continued to plan for their future. She chose to focus on the things she could control: the seating chart for the reception, the playlist for the dance floor, the vows she was carefully drafting in a leather-bound journal. She poured her heart into those vows, writing about how Mark had brought light into her life, how he had taught her to dream bigger and love deeper. She wrote about their plans to travel the world, to build a home filled with laughter and love. In those moments, it was easy to believe that everything would be okay. Still, the unease persisted, manifesting in small, quiet ways. Emma found herself hesitating before answering friends' questions about Mark, fumbling for answers when they asked about his family or his childhood. She avoided discussing the growing tension with anyone, fearing that voicing her concerns would make them real. Instead, she convinced herself that once the wedding was over, once they were officially husband and wife, everything would fall into place. Emma's parents, who adored Mark, were a source of comfort during this time. Her mother often remarked on how lucky Emma was to have found someone so kind and dependable. "He's a keeper, that one," her father would say with a wink, and Emma would smile, pushing her doubts to the back of her mind. She wanted so desperately to believe that they were right, that her life with Mark would be as perfect as they imagined. As the weeks turned into days and the wedding drew closer, Emma's sense of unease reached its peak. She began having vivid dreams in which Mark was a stranger, his face familiar, but his actions unrecognizable. In one dream, he walked away from her, disappearing into a fog, leaving her alone and confused. In another, he stood on the other side of a locked door, refusing to let her in. Emma woke from these dreams with her heart pounding, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Despite everything, Emma pressed on, determined to create the life she had always envisioned. She convinced herself that her doubts were just pre-wedding jitters, that every bride felt this way at some point. But deep down, she knew that her concerns were more than just nerves. They were the result of years of unanswered questions, of secrets left unexplored, of a past that remained a mystery. As she stood in front of the mirror one evening, trying on her wedding dress for the final fitting, Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of uncertainty. The dress was perfect, elegant, timeless, everything she had ever dreamed of. But as she looked at her reflection, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if the woman staring back at her wasn't entirely sure of the life she was about to step into. Emma shook off the thought, telling herself that she was overthinking. "You're just nervous," she whispered to herself. "It's going to be fine." And yet, as she left the bridal shop that evening, the questions lingered. Who was Mark, really? What was he hiding? And could she truly build a future with someone whose past remained a shadowy unknown? Emma didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain. The comfort of her present was beginning to unravel, and the future she had envisioned might not be as secure as she once thought. Emma Carter had always prided herself on her ability to trust her instincts. She had built her life on the steady foundation of logic and reason, always seeking out the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Her life with Mark Bennett had seemed like the perfect picture of happiness, but recently, something had started to feel off. The nagging feeling that she was missing something, a crucial part of Mark's life that he wasn't sharing, had grown louder with each passing day. Emma had tried to dismiss her concerns, chalking them up to pre-wedding jitters or the natural doubts that come with any major life change. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Mark's story than he was letting on. It wasn't just the cryptic phone calls, the hushed conversations, or the unexplained absences. It was the feeling of being kept at arm's length. Mark had always been open with her about everything, or so she thought. But now, there were walls where once there had been none. He had always been quick to share details of his day, his dreams, even his past. Yet now, when Emma casually asked about his childhood, his family, or the things that had shaped him, he would deflect, offering vague answers that left more questions than they answered. The more she probed, the more elusive Mark became, until Emma found herself wondering if there was something, or someone, he was trying to hide. One afternoon, as Emma sat in their cozy living room, flipping through a wedding magazine, her mind wandered back to the conversation she had had with Claire just a few weeks earlier. Claire had expressed her concerns about Mark's lack of transparency, pointing out how strange it was that Mark never seemed to talk about his family, his past relationships, or even his childhood friends. "It's not that he's secretive," Claire had said thoughtfully. "It's just that he doesn't seem to want to share anything. That's the thing that worries me." Emma had brushed it off at the time, convinced that Claire was overthinking things. "Some people are just private, Claire," she had said, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "It doesn't mean he's hiding anything." But now, as Emma sat alone with her thoughts, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it than she had realized. The turning point came one rainy evening. Emma had been working late at the office, preparing a presentation for an upcoming meeting, when she received a text from Mark. He'd asked if she could meet him at a nearby cafe after work to discuss the wedding plans. His message had been short, but his tone seemed off. There was an urgency in his words that piqued her curiosity. As she arrived at the cafe, Emma scanned the room for Mark, but he wasn't there. She ordered a coffee and sat at a table by the window, her eyes occasionally drifting to the door. It was only when she checked her phone again that she saw his text. "Sorry, I'm running late. I'll be there soon." Minutes passed, then an hour, and Mark still hadn't shown up. Emma's phone buzzed again, this time with a missed call from Mark. She quickly dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. Her heart started to race. Something didn't feel right. Why hadn't he called to explain where he was? Why hadn't he sent a follow-up text? Emma's mind raced with possibilities. Was something wrong with him? Was he in trouble? Or worse, was he avoiding her? As she sat there, waiting in the increasingly empty cafe, Emma felt the weight of uncertainty settle over her. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, the familiar sense of helplessness that came with the realization that something was wrong, but she had no idea what it was. She had never felt this way about Mark before. He had always been reliable, always been there when he said he would be. But now, it felt as though he was slipping through her fingers. When Mark finally showed up, almost 2 hours later, he was breathless and disheveled. He apologized profusely, explaining that he had gotten caught up at work and that he had lost track of time. Emma couldn't hide the frustration in her voice as she asked him why he hadn't at least texted her to let her know what was going on. Mark seemed genuinely surprised by her reaction, but he didn't press the issue further. They moved on to discuss the wedding plans, but Emma couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her gut. His explanation seemed plausible, but something about the whole situation felt staged, like he was trying to avoid something he wasn't willing to share. The next few days were filled with an unsettling quietness. Emma found herself distracted at work, unable to concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Mark, to that night in the cafe, to the strange sense of distance that had suddenly crept into their relationship. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. She loved him deeply, and she wanted to believe that he had nothing to hide. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't know Mark as well as she thought she did. She had always assumed that their relationship was built on honesty, but now, Emma wasn't so sure. It was late one evening, as Emma scrolled through her phone while lying in bed, that she found something she wasn't expecting. While looking for something in their shared photo album, she came across a picture of Mark that made her stop cold. It was a photo from a party, one she recognized from a time when they had been dating for only a few months. Mark was standing next to a woman, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing in a way that seemed far too intimate for a casual encounter. Emma stared at the photo, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen the woman before, and Mark had never mentioned her. Emma's thoughts spun wildly. Was this woman an ex-girlfriend? Someone he had been involved with before they had started dating? She had no idea, but the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Mark had never mentioned this woman, and the fact that there was a photo of them so close, so comfortable with each other, felt like a betrayal. The questions flooded Emma's mind in a relentless torrent. What was Mark hiding? Why hadn't he told her about this woman? Was she someone from his past, someone whose presence in his life still affected him? The photo was a crack in the facade, a small but significant detail that suggested that there were things Mark had chosen not to share with her, things that were too important to be kept in the dark. Emma's sense of unease deepened, and she knew that she couldn't ignore this any longer. The truth was out there, and she was determined to find it. The next day, Emma couldn't concentrate on anything. The photo weighed on her mind like a heavy stone. She kept replaying the image in her head, trying to make sense of it. She had always believed that Mark was the kind of person who would be honest with her, who would share everything with her, his hopes, his fears, and even the mistakes he had made in the past. But now, she wasn't so sure. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had never asked Mark about his past in any real depth. She had always taken his word for everything, assuming that he was telling her the truth. But was he? Emma decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew that she couldn't just let this go. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She made a decision. The next time Mark was away on one of his business trips, she would do something she had never done before. She would go through his things. She wasn't proud of it, but the idea of continuing to live in uncertainty was unbearable. If Mark truly had nothing to hide, then there would be no harm in her looking, right? That night, after Mark had left for his trip, Emma set her plan in motion. She walked into his study, where he kept his personal items and work papers. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, and everything was as it always was, neatly arranged, organized. But as Emma began to sift through his things, her hands trembling with anticipation and fear, she couldn't shake the feeling that what she was doing was a betrayal of trust. But at that moment, she was beyond caring. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As Emma sifted through Mark's things, she found nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. Papers, receipts, a few old photos, nothing that offered the answers she was looking for. But then, at the very bottom of a drawer, she found a small, black notebook. It was old, well-worn, and filled with scribbled notes in Mark's handwriting. Emma opened it, her fingers trembling as she read through the pages. What she found made her blood run cold. There, written in the same familiar handwriting, were details about people she had never heard of, names, phone numbers, and addresses. But the most chilling thing was the list of dates, events, and places that didn't match anything in the life Mark had shared with her. Emma's heart pounded as she realized that she was no longer looking at the man she thought she knew. The truths she had sought had been right in front of her all along. Emma stood at the threshold of her new reality, staring into the abyss of uncertainty. What she had once assumed to be a stable and trustworthy relationship with Mark now seemed riddled with doubt and mystery. She had always prided herself on her ability to navigate life with logic and clarity, but now, she found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions and questions that refused to be answered. The world she had built around her, the one in which Mark was her perfect match, her soulmate, had suddenly fractured, and Emma was forced to step into a realm she had never considered, the world of secrecy, deception, and betrayal. As she stood there, processing everything she had uncovered, Emma felt like a stranger in her own life. Her heart ached with the realization that the man she had planned to marry, the man she had trusted with her hopes, dreams, and vulnerabilities, was not the person she had believed him to be. The photo of Mark with another woman, the notebook filled with names and dates she didn't recognize, it all pointed to a web of lies that Emma was only beginning to untangle. The life she had envisioned with him now felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest provocation. But despite the betrayal, despite the confusion that consumed her, Emma couldn't walk away. Not yet. Something deep inside her told her that there was more to the story, something she still didn't understand. She couldn't ignore the bond she had built with Mark over the past few years, the love they had shared, the life they had planned together. Part of her refused to believe that everything she had known up until now had been a lie. But another part of her, one that had been awakened by the shocking discoveries, knew that she couldn't blindly continue down a path that felt so wrong. Emma knew that she had to confront Mark, to demand the truth. But she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. Confronting someone you love, someone you trust, with accusations of betrayal, was never simple. It required strength, resolve, and the courage to face whatever truths might be revealed. Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she realized that she was about to enter uncharted territory, a place where no amount of preparation could shield her from the emotional fallout. The next few days were an emotional blur. Emma's mind raced with 1,000 different scenarios, each one more painful than the last. She couldn't stop replaying the images in her mind. The photo of Mark with the other woman, the notebook with its cryptic notes, the texts and phone calls that had hinted at something darker beneath the surface. Every time she tried to focus on something else, the questions resurfaced, like a tidal wave that refused to be held back. Was Mark hiding something? Was he lying to her about his past, his present, and maybe even his future? The more she thought about it, the more Emma realized that she had been blind to the signs. There had been moments, small moments, when her intuition had tried to alert her. Mark's sudden absences, his reluctance to discuss certain topics, the vague answers he gave when she asked about his past, all of it should have raised red flags. But Emma had ignored those signs, convincing herself that everything was fine, that Mark was just a private person who preferred to keep certain things to himself. She had believed in the illusion of their perfect relationship, in the idea that love was all they needed. But now, that illusion was crumbling. One evening, after another long day of wrestling with her thoughts, Emma sat alone in their apartment. Mark had gone to his office to work late, and for the first time in days, Emma felt a fleeting sense of peace. It was as if the silence in the apartment allowed her to think clearly, to sift through her emotions without the constant distraction of Mark's presence. She walked over to the small desk in the corner, where Mark kept his personal belongings, papers, files, and a few books. As her gaze fell on the stack of papers, Emma knew what she had to do. She couldn't keep waiting for Mark to confess, to come clean on his own. She had to take control of the situation, to face it head-on. She had to confront him, but first, she needed to know everything. The truth. All of it. With a deep breath, Emma gathered her resolve and began sifting through the papers on the desk. She felt a pang of guilt as she opened the drawer, rifling through Mark's things. But she pushed the feeling aside. She couldn't afford to be passive any longer. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. It was in the second drawer that she found the first clue, a small envelope, tucked away at the back. It wasn't anything particularly special, just a plain envelope, slightly crumpled at the edges. But the moment Emma touched it, she felt her heart skip a beat. This was different. This wasn't just a letter or a receipt. There was something inside it, something that Mark had intentionally hidden. With trembling hands, Emma carefully opened the envelope. Inside, she found a set of photos, much like the one she had seen before, the one with Mark and the other woman. This time, however, there were more photos, dozens of them. They were candid shots, taken at various locations over the years, and in each one, Mark was with the same woman. Emma's mind raced as she flipped through the photos. She could feel the blood rushing to her head, a dizzying mix of disbelief and anger coursing through her. The woman in the photos was no stranger to Mark. She was someone he had been involved with long before Emma had entered the picture. And yet, Mark had never mentioned her. Each photo seemed to tell a different story, one that Emma had never been privy to. There were pictures of them laughing together, of them sharing intimate moments, of them holding hands in a way that suggested a deep connection, one that had lasted long after their supposed breakup. Mark had never told Emma about this woman, and now, It was clear that she had never truly been a thing of the past. She had always been there, lingering in the background of Emma's relationship with Mark, a constant shadow that Emma had been too blind to see. The next day, Emma knew it was time. She had gathered the evidence, pieced together the puzzle, and now, there was no more avoiding the truth. She needed to confront Mark. She had to know why he had kept this secret from her, why he had lied by omission and hidden the most important parts of his past. As she waited for him to return from his meeting, Emma's nerves grew with each passing minute. Her hands were clammy, her thoughts a jumble of anger, hurt, and confusion. She couldn't predict how Mark would react, but she knew that the confrontation was inevitable. She had to face him. When Mark walked through the door, his usual warm smile faded when he saw Emma standing in the middle of the room, her expression serious, determined. He immediately knew something was wrong. "Emma? What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Sit down, Mark," she said, her voice calm but firm. She held the envelope with the photos in her hand, the very thing that had shattered her perception of their relationship. Mark hesitated, but then sat down across from her, his eyes darting nervously. Emma took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she spoke the words that would change everything.
"We need to talk."
"I found something, and I need you to explain it." Mark's face paled as she slid the envelope across the table toward him. His eyes flicked to the photos, and Emma saw the panic flash across his face. "Emma,
No, Mark.
I need the truth. All of it." "Who is she?" she interrupted, her voice steady but filled with the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. Mark exhaled deeply, his hands shaking as he reached for the envelope. He looked at the photos for a long moment, then set them down slowly, his gaze meeting Emma's with a mixture of guilt and fear. "I never meant for you to find out this way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't deny it anymore." Emma's pulse quickened, the truth finally coming to the surface. She wasn't sure what to feel anymore, whether to be angry, sad, or just completely lost. She had asked for the truth, and now it was here. The woman in the photos, the secrets Mark had hidden, the life he had kept from her, it was all becoming too much to bear. But as Mark began to explain, Emma realized that this confrontation was just the beginning. She wasn't sure where this would all lead, but one thing was certain. She was no longer in familiar territory. The path ahead was uncertain, and Emma had no idea what to expect, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Emma had always prided herself on her ability to read people. She had always been the type to trust her instincts, to listen to that quiet voice inside that guided her decisions. But now, standing on the edge of a revelation she had never seen coming, Emma realized just how far her instincts had been wrong. The man she had loved for so long, the man she had thought she knew inside and out, had hidden a life from her, a life that had remained a secret, even from the woman who was supposed to be his closest companion. The truth, however, was slowly revealing itself, pulling her into unfamiliar territory, a place where she was forced to question everything she thought she knew about trust, love, and loyalty. In the days leading up to her confrontation with Mark, Emma had felt as though she were walking through a fog. Each day blurred into the next, a constant cycle of denial and disbelief. She had discovered the evidence, the photos, the strange notebook, and the unsettling feeling that Mark had been keeping something from her. But knowing something wasn't the same as understanding it. She had seen the photos of Mark with another woman, but she couldn't reconcile the man in those pictures with the person she had known for years. How had she missed the signs? How had she allowed herself to be so blinded by love that she had ignored the pieces of the puzzle that were right in front of her? Emma's thoughts were a constant whirlwind, a storm of questions that refused to be answered. She had tried to distract herself, to focus on the mundane tasks of everyday life, but the more she tried to push the thoughts away, the stronger they became. It was as if her mind was a broken record, replaying the same questions over and over again. Who is this woman? How long had Mark been keeping this from her? And, most haunting of all, why? What had driven him to hide such a significant part of his life from her, his fiancée? For the first time in her life, Emma was terrified of the truth. She had always been the type to confront her problems head-on, to deal with things as they came. But now, as she prepared to confront Mark, she felt like she was about to step into a world she didn't recognize, a world where nothing made sense and where her carefully constructed reality could come crashing down at any moment. She had spent so many years building a life with Mark, imagining a future together, but now that future felt fragile, like it could break apart with just one wrong move. She knew she had to confront him. She couldn't let this go on any longer, couldn't let herself live in this limbo of uncertainty. But the fear of what she might discover, of what the truth might really mean, kept her paralyzed, stuck in this strange, new space between what she had always known and what she was about to learn. Days turned into nights, and still, Emma couldn't bring herself to speak to Mark about what she had found. She was afraid of the confrontation, afraid of what might happen if she pushed him too hard. But the longer she waited, the more the questions gnawed at her, until they were the only things she could think about. Emma's once peaceful home had turned into a battleground in her mind. The joy that had once filled their apartment now felt suffocating, like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something dark lingering just beyond her reach, something that Mark had hidden away, and it was only a matter of time before it came crashing into her world. One evening, after yet another long day of battling with her thoughts, Emma made up her mind. She was done waiting. She could no longer live with this uncertainty. She had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. She had to face the man she loved and demand answers. As the evening wore on, she found herself standing in front of their bedroom mirror, staring at her reflection. She hardly recognized the woman who looked back at her. The woman in the mirror seemed lost, fragile, as though she had been broken and pieced back together in a hurry. Her eyes were tired, the dark circles beneath them a reminder of the sleepless nights she had spent thinking about Mark's betrayal. She ran her fingers through her hair, trying to calm herself. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation. She had faced difficult situations before, things that had tested her strength and resolve, but this felt different. This wasn't just about a disagreement or a minor betrayal. This was about the foundation of her life being shattered. It was about trust, about love, and about the future she had believed in crumbling into dust. Emma had never thought that she would be in this position, standing here alone in their bedroom, preparing to confront the man she was supposed to marry. But here she was. With a deep breath, Emma left the bedroom and walked into the living room, where she knew Mark would be. He was sitting on the couch, reading a book, seemingly unaware of the storm that was brewing. Emma's heart raced as she approached him. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips.
Hey, Eminencia.
What's up? His casual tone made Emma's stomach twist. How could he be so relaxed when she was drowning in uncertainty? How could he not feel the weight of the secrets he was carrying? She forced herself to remain calm, to focus on what she needed to do. This wasn't about emotions. This was about facts. She had to confront him with what she knew, to demand the truth and nothing less. I need to talk to you, Mark, Emma said, her voice steady but firm. About something I found. Mark's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing slightly. He set the book down and stood up, his body language shifting, as if sensing that this conversation wasn't going to be easy. What's going on? I know about her, Emma said quietly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it even. Mark's face went pale, and for a moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Emma felt her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew that the moment of reckoning had arrived. She couldn't avoid it anymore. Finally, Mark opened his mouth, but the words that came out were not what Emma had expected. Emma, please, let me explain, he said, his voice shaking with what sounded like fear. It's not what you think. Emma shook her head, refusing to let him off the hook. Don't lie to me, Mark. I know about the photos. I know about her. And I need to understand why you kept this from me. Mark seemed to falter for a moment, his gaze darting to the floor. He took a deep breath before meeting her eyes again. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said, his voice low and filled with regret. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared of losing you." The words stung more than Emma had anticipated. She had always believed that Mark would be honest with her, that they could weather any storm together. But now, as she stood in front of him, she realized just how deep his deception had gone. The man she had trusted had kept a part of his life hidden from her, and she was left to pick up the pieces. "I deserve the truth, Mark," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I need to know why you kept this from me. What was so important that you couldn't tell me?" For the first time, Mark seemed to break. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes filled with tears. "I thought I could fix things on my own. I didn't want to hurt you, Emma. I didn't want you to see the truth." Emma took a step back, her mind reeling with the weight of his words. She had always believed that love could overcome anything, that trust was the foundation of every relationship. But now, she wasn't sure anymore. The truth was in front of her, and it was too much to bear. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I can keep going with this." Mark reached out, but Emma pulled away. She couldn't let him touch her, not now. The walls she had built up were crumbling, and the man she thought she knew was no longer standing in front of her. The days following Emma's confrontation with Mark were a blur. Her world, once built on a foundation of trust and shared dreams, felt suddenly fractured. She had made the decision to confront him, to demand answers, and now, standing at the precipice of the truth, she was unsure of how to navigate the chaos that had taken root in her life. The feelings of betrayal, confusion, and disbelief were overwhelming. Mark, the man she had trusted more than anyone else, had kept a significant part of his life hidden from her for years. The weight of this revelation was heavy, suffocating even. But Emma had made a choice. She was no longer going to pretend that everything was fine. She had to adapt to the truth, no matter how painful it might be. In the weeks following the confrontation, Emma tried to find her footing in a world that had been irrevocably altered. She had always prided herself on being a woman who could handle anything that came her way, someone who could solve problems with grace and logic. But now, Emma realized that this was different. There were no easy answers, no straightforward solutions. Her life was no longer a simple narrative that she could control. It had become a tangled mess of emotions, decisions, and consequences. And the more she tried to untangle it, the more complicated it became. The first few days after the confrontation were the hardest. Emma didn't know where to turn. She found herself alone in her apartment, surrounded by the remnants of the life she had built with Mark. The pictures on the walls, the furniture they had chosen together, the little mementos that held sentimental value, all of it felt tainted now. The space that had once felt like a home now seemed like a prison. She couldn't escape the feeling that everything was watching her, reminding her of the betrayal that had shaken her to the core. Mark, in the days following their conversation, had tried to reach out to her. He apologized, over and over again, for keeping secrets from her. He tried to explain the reasons behind his actions, claiming that he never meant to hurt her, that he had simply been afraid of losing her. But Emma couldn't hear his apologies. The words sounded hollow, empty. They didn't change the fact that he had hidden something so significant from her. It didn't change the fact that his deceit had undermined everything she thought she knew about their relationship. She had always believed in transparency, in honesty, and yet here she was, standing on the other side of a betrayal so deep it had shattered the trust between them. At first, Emma tried to focus on the practicalities. She needed to make decisions about what to do next. She couldn't stay in the apartment with Mark, not after everything that had happened. She started making plans to move out, to create distance between them, to give herself the space she needed to think. But even as she packed her things, Emma felt a tug in her heart, a sense of loss that she couldn't explain. She had always dreamed of building a future with Mark, of getting married, of growing old together. But now, those dreams seemed distant, impossible. The life she had imagined was slipping through her fingers, and she had no idea what the future held. During the days when she wasn't packing or sorting through her emotions, Emma found herself walking aimlessly through the city. The familiar streets no longer felt familiar. They seemed foreign, as if she were seeing everything through a new lens, one that was clouded with doubt and uncertainty. She walked past cafes they had visited together, parks where they had spent afternoons, and shops where they had picked out gifts for each other. Everywhere she turned, memories of their relationship flooded her, and with them came the painful realization that those memories had been built on a lie. As Emma tried to adapt to this new reality, she also began to face the deeper questions that had been lingering in the back of her mind. What had really happened between Mark and the other woman? How long had the affair lasted? Was it just one mistake, or was it something more serious? The questions were endless, and each one seemed to lead to another. Emma realized that, despite everything, she still didn't know the full truth. Mark had apologized, but he hadn't offered any concrete explanations. He hadn't given her the clarity she needed to understand the full scope of what had happened. And without that clarity, Emma found herself caught in a cycle of second-guessing and self-doubt. Was she making the right decision by walking away? Could she ever trust Mark again? Was it possible for their relationship to survive this betrayal? The emotional toll of all this uncertainty began to wear on Emma. She found herself constantly on edge, unable to focus on anything for long. Work, which had once been a source of fulfillment, now felt like a distraction. She went through the motions, completing tasks and attending meetings, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about Mark, about their relationship, about what had gone wrong. She knew she needed to focus on herself, to give herself time to heal, but that seemed easier said than done. Emma tried to spend more time with her friends. She needed support, and she knew that they were the ones who would help her navigate this difficult time. But even in their company, she felt disconnected. Her friends were sympathetic, of course, but they couldn't fully understand what she was going through. They hadn't been in her shoes. They hadn't experienced the deep betrayal that she was now living with. Their well-meaning advice didn't always resonate with her, and she found herself withdrawing even more, retreating into herself. It wasn't until one particularly difficult evening, when Emma was sitting in her apartment, staring at the walls and feeling completely lost, that she realized something important. She had been focusing so much on the pain and the betrayal that she had forgotten something essential. She was still her. She was still Emma. She still had the strength to move forward, to rebuild her life, to find happiness again. She didn't need Mark or anyone else to define who she was. She didn't need to rely on the past to shape her future. The truth was painful, yes, but it was also liberating. She had the power to choose what came next. She could decide who she wanted to be, where she wanted to go, and what kind of life she wanted to live. In that moment, Emma made a decision. She would stop looking backward, stop fixating on the things she couldn't change. She would start focusing on the things she could control, her own healing, her own growth, and her own future. She would adapt to this new reality, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She wasn't going to let this betrayal define her. She wasn't going to let it dictate her future. She had a choice, and she was going to choose to move forward. The first step in this process was simple. Emma decided to cut ties with Mark. She told him that she needed space, that she needed to find herself again. She didn't want to be in contact with him for a while. She needed to figure out who she was without him. Mark didn't argue. He knew it was the right thing to do. He respected her decision, even though it broke his heart. But Emma knew it was the right thing for her. She needed to reclaim her independence, to find her own path forward without being weighed down by the past. In the days that followed, Emma began to rediscover things about herself that she had long forgotten. She took up new hobbies, started writing in a journal again, and spent more time with her family. She found herself laughing again, feeling moments of joy that she hadn't experienced in a long time. She was healing, slowly but surely. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the pain of the betrayal would creep back in, but Emma was learning to cope with it. She was learning to accept the truth, not as something that had destroyed her, but as something that had made her stronger. As time went on, Emma found herself adapting to the new life she had created. She was no longer the person she had been when she was with Mark. She had changed, but in ways that were both empowering and liberating.
She was no longer bound by the past.
She was free to be who she wanted to be, to create the future she had always dreamed of. And though the journey was far from over, Emma knew that she was capable of facing whatever came next, no matter how difficult or painful it might be. The days that followed Emma's decision to confront Mark and move forward without him were a whirlwind of mixed emotions. She was standing on the edge of a new beginning, yet still tangled in the remnants of the past. It had been weeks since their emotional confrontation, and Mark's attempts to reconnect with her had not abated. His apologies, his explanations, and his gestures of regret came in waves, crashing against the shore of Emma's resolve. She had made the choice to walk away from him, and though the pain of it all lingered, Emma thought that she was moving in the right direction. She thought she was gaining the freedom she so desperately needed. But the longer Emma spent in the safety of her decision, the more she realized that something unexpected was happening inside her. Something she had not anticipated. She had spent so long focusing on what was wrong in her life, the betrayal, the broken trust, the shattered dreams, that she hadn't truly stopped to think about what she wanted now. Beyond the hurt, beyond the guilt and the conflict, there was a part of her that felt conflicted. For all of the anger she had toward Mark, for all of the rational thinking that told her she was doing the right thing, there was a quiet voice in the back of her mind that asked, "What if you've made a mistake? What if, in her attempt to avoid a future of lies, she was sacrificing something else, something far more precious, love?" Emma couldn't deny the truth. She still loved Mark. Despite everything he had done, despite everything that had happened, her feelings for him hadn't disappeared. The love that she had for him was still buried deep inside her heart, and no amount of time or distance seemed to shake it loose. She had tried to convince herself that it was gone, that their relationship was over, and yet she couldn't shake the lingering emotional attachment. The more she reflected on the past, the more she realized that perhaps her decision to walk away wasn't as clear-cut as she had once believed. It had been a decision based on pain, fear, and betrayal, but now that time had passed, she couldn't ignore the nagging thought that she might have been too hasty. There was no denying the fact that Mark's mistakes had hurt her. The deception, the secrets, those were real, and they couldn't simply be erased. But in the midst of all of it, there were still the memories of the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had held her hand during difficult times, the man who had made her laugh, the man who had shared in her dreams for the future. These memories were difficult to ignore, and they haunted her as she tried to move on with her life. She had built a life with him, and it was hard to imagine the future without him in it. As Emma continued to wrestle with these conflicting emotions, she found herself at a crossroads. She had asked for space, but the truth was, she hadn't truly taken the time to fully process everything. She had been so focused on her anger, so focused on her hurt, that she had pushed away the feelings that she still had for him. She hadn't allowed herself to grieve properly or to question whether it was possible to rebuild the relationship with Mark. What she had thought was a clear-cut decision now felt murky and uncertain. In the weeks that followed, Mark made several attempts to show her how serious he was about making amends. He didn't just apologize. He took real, tangible steps to demonstrate that he understood the gravity of his actions. He sought therapy to address his own issues, and he began to take ownership of his past mistakes, not just in words but in actions. For the first time, Emma could see that he was genuinely committed to changing, to understanding why he had made the choices he had, and to working on becoming a better man. He was no longer the man who had hidden parts of his life from her, but someone who was confronting his demons head-on and striving to become a better person. Despite these efforts, Emma couldn't ignore the doubts that continued to linger in her mind. Was it enough? Could he change? Could they rebuild what had been broken, or was the damage too deep to repair? Emma was torn. Her heart told her that she still loved him, that there was a chance for them, but her mind reminded her of all the hurt and betrayal. Her mind screamed at her to move on, to protect herself from further pain. But her heart wanted to believe that love could heal all wounds, that trust could be rebuilt, and that perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to make things work. At the same time, Emma began to recognize that part of her hesitation to move forward was rooted in fear. fear of vulnerability, fear of being hurt again, and fear of making the wrong choice. The idea of opening herself up to someone who had betrayed her was terrifying. But as she thought about it more, Emma realized that she had been living in fear for too long. Fear of being hurt, fear of being alone, fear of making a mistake. She had been letting these fears dictate her choices for far too long, and now it was time to take control of her own future. It was with this realization that Emma made a decision. She would give Mark another chance. She would open her heart to him, but with the understanding that this time, the relationship would be different. This time, she would not allow herself to be blinded by idealism or false promises. She would hold him accountable for his actions, but she would also allow room for growth and healing. She would take the risk of loving again, but only if it meant rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect, trust, and honesty. Mark was overjoyed when Emma told him her decision. He had been waiting for this moment, hoping that she would find it in her heart to give him another chance. He had spent so much time reflecting on his past actions, on his mistakes, and on what he had lost. And now, with Emma's decision, he felt as if he had a chance to prove himself, to prove that he could be the man she deserved. He was willing to do whatever it took to show her that he had changed, and that he was ready to build a future with her. It was a humbling moment for him, one that filled him with both hope and determination. As Emma and Mark began to navigate the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship, they found themselves in unfamiliar territory. They were no longer the same people they had been before the betrayal. They were different now, scarred by their past, yet hopeful for the future. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments when the pain of the past threatened to resurface, and moments when Emma questioned whether she had made the right decision. But there were also moments of growth. Moments when they learned how to communicate more openly, how to rebuild trust, and how to support each other in ways they hadn't before. Despite the challenges they faced, Emma and Mark began to experience what could only be described as a tentative renewal. They weren't picking up where they had left off, they couldn't. But they were building something new together, something grounded in honesty and understanding. It was a slow process, but with every small step, they grew stronger. The love that they had once shared was still there, but it had transformed. It was no longer the same idealistic love they had once known. It was deeper, more mature, and more realistic. And, in its own way, it was more meaningful than it had ever been before. Emma's decision to give Mark another chance was not a moment of weakness, but a moment of strength. She had been brave enough to face the truth, brave enough to confront her fears, and brave enough to take a risk on love again. She didn't know where their relationship would go, or whether it would last in the long term, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that she was on the right path. In the end, Emma got what she wanted. It wasn't the easy resolution she had once imagined. It wasn't the fairy tale ending she had dreamed of. But it was real. It was raw. And it was theirs. It was a love that had been tested by betrayal, but had survived because they were willing to face the truth, to learn from the past, and to move forward together. As the days turned into weeks, Emma began to realize that the decision she had made to give Mark another chance had not come without its consequences. While they were trying to rebuild their relationship, each step forward seemed to come with its own set of challenges, as though the universe was testing whether their love could truly withstand the weight of their past. Emma found herself confronted with emotions she hadn't anticipated, doubts, guilt, and a fear that she had made a terrible mistake. Even as she saw Mark working hard to prove himself, a part of her couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was walking down a path she might regret. It was late one evening when the full impact of her decision hit her. Emma had been sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when she came across something that completely shattered her sense of security. It was an email, one that had been sent from Mark's old email account to an anonymous recipient. The subject line was innocuous enough, a casual exchange about a business transaction, but as Emma began to read, she realized that the contents were far from innocent. The email detailed a series of arrangements that Mark had made before their breakup, a plan to cover up some of the secrets she had uncovered. It wasn't just about hiding the past anymore, it was about lying to Emma in real time, as if he was preparing for a future in which she didn't know the full truth. In that moment, Everything Emma had thought she understood about Mark and their future together felt like it was falling apart again. The betrayal was not a thing of the past. It was happening in the present. The promise of transparency and honesty that Mark had made to her was nothing more than another layer of deception. She had chosen to believe in him, and in return, she had been handed another lie, a lie that confirmed her deepest fears, that she could never truly trust him again. Emma's mind raced. How could she have been so naive? She had opened herself up to him, willing to rebuild their relationship, to let go of her anger and doubts. She had given him a chance to prove that he was a changed man, that he had learned from his mistakes. But now, with this revelation in front of her, she had to face the hard truth. Mark had never really changed at all. He had merely gotten better at hiding his deceit. The weight of that realization was almost unbearable. She tried to call him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The silence on the other end felt like a betrayal in itself. How could he not answer? Was this just another attempt to distance himself from the truth? Emma's emotions swirled between anger, disappointment, and deep, gut-wrenching sadness. She had given him everything, her trust, her heart, and her hope for a future together, and he had repaid her with yet another lie. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, a mixture of heartache and betrayal that had come to define so much of her relationship with Mark. The next day, Emma confronted Mark. She didn't sugarcoat her words. She didn't pretend that she didn't know the truth. She laid it all out, the email, the lies, the false promises. Mark's face went pale as he listened to her speak, and Emma could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. But even then, despite the guilt that seemed to hang in the air like a dense fog, Mark tried to explain himself. He claimed that it wasn't what it seemed, that it was a misunderstanding, and that he was still trying to fix things. But Emma wasn't listening anymore. She had heard these excuses before, and they no longer held any weight. The confrontation that followed was intense. Mark pleaded with her, asking for another chance, asking for her forgiveness, insisting that he was a changed man. But Emma was done. She had given him everything, her trust, her love, her time, and he had squandered it. Each time she tried to walk away, he pulled her back in, making promises that he could never keep. But now, as the truth had come crashing down around them, Emma realized that the damage had been done, and there was no going back. In the days that followed, Emma tried to gather the strength to leave, but it wasn't as easy as it seemed. The emotional weight of it all hung over her, and she found herself questioning everything. She had worked so hard to let go of the past, to move forward, to forgive him, but now she was faced with the unbearable reality that she had been wrong. The consequences of her decision to give him another chance were far-reaching, and Emma found herself paying a heavy price for it. She couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal that had lodged itself in her heart, the feeling that no matter how much she tried to move on, she would always be haunted by the echoes of Mark's lies. It wasn't just the broken trust that hurt, it was the realization that she had allowed herself to be fooled again. The person she had loved so deeply, the person she had wanted to spend her life with, had once again proven that he wasn't worthy of her trust. She had sacrificed her own happiness and peace of mind, all in the name of love. But now, Emma saw that love alone wasn't enough to sustain a relationship. Honesty, integrity, and respect were the foundations that mattered. Without those, everything else was built on shaky ground. The toll of all of this was immense. Emma found herself emotionally drained, questioning her own judgment and struggling to find a way out. She had put herself through this emotional roller coaster, believing that she was making the right choice, but now it seemed that the only way forward was to let go. She had to leave Mark behind, for her own sake. The hardest part of this decision wasn't the actual act of leaving him, it was the emotional aftermath. Even after everything that had happened, Emma still loved him. The love she had once felt for him wasn't gone. It was buried beneath layers of hurt, betrayal, and disappointment, but it was still there, whispering in the corners of her heart. Letting go meant severing that connection, and that was the hardest thing Emma had ever had to do. As the days passed, Emma's anger slowly transformed into sadness. She mourned the relationship she had once thought would last forever. She mourned the future they had planned, the dreams they had shared. But above all, Emma mourned the loss of trust, the loss of something that could never be fully rebuilt, no matter how much they both tried. And yet, amidst the grief, Emma began to realize something important. She had paid a heavy price for her decision to trust again, but in the end, it wasn't just about the price she paid for giving Mark another chance. It was about what she had learned through the process. She had learned the importance of self-worth, of not allowing someone else's mistakes to define her. She had learned that love, while powerful, wasn't enough to overcome the deep scars of betrayal. And most importantly, Emma had learned that it was okay to walk away from something that wasn't healthy for her, even if it meant sacrificing the future she had once dreamed of. The price she paid was steep, but it was necessary. It was a painful lesson, but one that she would carry with her as she moved forward. Mark's lies, his broken promises, and the shattered trust had cost her more than she had ever expected. But in the end, Emma understood that the cost of staying in a toxic relationship would have been far greater. She had given him the opportunity to prove himself, and he had failed. But in choosing to walk away, Emma was choosing herself. She was choosing her own peace, her own happiness, and her own future. As Emma moved forward, she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. She had lost something precious, and healing would take time. But she had also gained something invaluable: clarity, strength, and the courage to move on from a relationship that had never truly been built on a solid foundation. The price had been high, but it was worth it. The weeks following Emma's decision to leave Mark were some of the most difficult of her life. The emotional weight of everything that had happened still lingered in her heart, clouding her thoughts and clouding her vision of the future. But even in the midst of her sadness, Emma felt something else stirring within her, a quiet sense of clarity. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. The chaos that had defined her relationship with Mark had subsided, leaving space for something new, a new sense of purpose, of self-worth, and of independence. It was a painful rebirth, but one that Emma knew would ultimately set her on a path toward a healthier and more fulfilling life. For a while, Emma kept to herself. She focused on her work, diving into her professional life with renewed vigor. She had always been good at her job, but now, her success at work felt like a personal triumph. It was more than just a paycheck. It was a reminder that she was capable of standing on her own 2 feet, without the crutch of a toxic relationship. Every new accomplishment, every new project she completed, was another step toward regaining her confidence. Yet, even with the professional success and moments of personal growth, Emma couldn't ignore the lingering pain of her emotional wounds. There were times when she found herself missing the comfort that Mark had once provided, his presence, his laughter, the warmth of his touch. She realized that, despite everything, she had loved him deeply, and it was hard to sever that connection completely. Letting go wasn't just about cutting ties. It was about accepting the fact that the person she had once envisioned a future with wasn't the person she thought he was. And while Emma had taken the necessary step to walk away, it wasn't always easy to let go of the memories, the dreams, and the promises she had once held so dear. As time passed, Emma became more introspective. She spent hours reflecting on the lessons she had learned from her relationship with Mark, the mistakes they had both made, and the things she had failed to see while she was wrapped up in the emotions of it all. She came to understand that she had been too willing to sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of preserving the relationship. She had believed in love so strongly that she had allowed herself to be blinded by it. And when she walked away, it wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the end of the version of herself that had allowed those sacrifices to define her. With each passing day, Emma grew more comfortable with who she was and who she was becoming. She began to realize that her worth wasn't defined by who she was in a relationship with, or how much she was willing to give of herself to others. Her worth was intrinsic. It was built on her values, her dreams, and her ability to stand up for herself, even when it felt like the world was against her. She was stronger than she had given herself credit for. One day, Emma found herself revisiting the places that had once been special to her and Mark. She walked through the park where they had first met, recalling the early days of their relationship, the excitement, the joy, the promise of a future that seemed so bright. She felt a pang of sadness, a lingering ache for the dreams that would never come to pass. But as she sat on a bench and watched the world go by, something shifted within her. She realized that she didn't need to hold on to those memories anymore. She didn't need to look back in order to move forward. Emma had learned that life wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning from it and using that knowledge to shape the future. She understood now that her love for Mark, no matter how deep, wasn't enough to make up for the broken promises and the lies. It wasn't about keeping the memory of their relationship alive for the sake of nostalgia. It was about honoring what they had shared by letting go of what had hurt her. In that moment, Emma realized that her heart could heal, and in healing, it would become stronger than ever before. As she returned to her familiar routine, Emma noticed changes in herself. She wasn't the same woman who had once been so afraid of being alone, so afraid of confronting the reality of her relationship with Mark. She had become someone who valued her independence, her peace of mind, and her happiness above all else. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her, she was learning to complete herself. Her friends noticed the transformation, too. They had seen the toll the relationship with Mark had taken on her, the way she had dimmed herself to keep the peace, to keep the relationship intact. But now, they saw a woman who was unapologetically herself, who was no longer afraid to stand tall and assert her needs and desires. They admired her strength and resilience, and they encouraged her to keep going, to keep embracing the new version of herself that was emerging. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt, moments when Emma questioned whether she was truly on the right path, moments when the loneliness crept in, whispering that she had made a mistake by leaving Mark behind. But those moments were fewer and farther between. They no longer had the power to pull her back into the past. Emma had learned that she didn't need to rush into another relationship, or to fill the space left by Mark with someone else. She was learning to enjoy her own company, to embrace the quiet moments of solitude, and to understand that she didn't have to be in a relationship to feel complete. One evening, Emma sat down with her journal and began to write. She reflected on the lessons she had learned, the strength she had found within herself, and the journey she had been on. Writing it all down was cathartic, like releasing the last of the old wounds that had held her back for so long. As she wrote, she realized that she had come full circle. She had started this journey looking for answers, trying to make sense of the chaos that had been her relationship with Mark. But now, she had found those answers. The truth was simple. She was enough. She didn't need anyone else to define her worth. She had everything she needed within herself. In the weeks that followed, Emma began to see her life with new eyes. The career that had once been just a job was now a passion, and she was more focused and determined than ever before. She was meeting new people, not because she was looking for someone to replace Mark, but because she was expanding her world. She was discovering new interests, taking up hobbies she had once abandoned, and making time for the things that truly brought her joy. The pieces of her life that had felt fractured after her breakup were starting to come together in ways she hadn't anticipated. And yet, Emma never forgot the lessons she had learned from her time with Mark. Those lessons were etched into her soul, a constant reminder of the importance of self-respect, honesty, and the power of walking away from something that no longer served her. She had paid a heavy price for the love she had once shared with Mark, but now she understood that the cost had been worth it. She had gained something far more valuable, the strength to move on, the wisdom to trust herself, and the courage to live life on her own terms. One day, as Emma sat at a cafe sipping her coffee, she ran into an old friend from her college days. They chatted casually, catching up on each other's lives. Her friend noticed how different Emma seemed, more confident, more at peace. "You've really changed," her friend remarked, a smile in her voice. Emma smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I've learned a lot about myself," she replied, feeling the truth of her words. "And I'm finally okay with who I am." As they parted ways, Emma realized something. She had returned to her familiar situation. But now, she was armed with a new truth. The past no longer held the power to define her future. She had learned to let go of what no longer served her, and in doing so, she had made space for the life she truly deserved. A life of independence, self-respect, and boundless possibilities. Emma was no longer the woman who had feared change. She was the woman who had embraced it, who had found strength in vulnerability, and who was ready to face whatever came next with open arms. She had walked through the storm, and now, she was ready to enjoy the calm.